If you were to take the whole of art history and extract all the painters, and if you were, from their careers and all their work, you were to boil all that history down into basically two methods of use of paint, glazing would be one of them. The two main methods. The other would be the use of solid impasto paint. The two are like brother and sister. Glazing is the second half of the whole idea of making paintings. The second method that makes all manner of things possible. So when you look at art in a museum, mainly you're looking through glazes into other worlds captured in paint. It's enormous. I can't begin to stress. Caravaggio, Vermeer, and many modern painters like Francis Bacon and many others right to the present day use glazing extensively. This is what it is. It's a method of mixing paint with a varnish-like medium, basically something to make it translucent. And it creates a layer that is, in fact, it can be anywhere from almost opaque to almost completely transparent. The most useful areas are in the middle, in the translucent colors. What it is basically being able to look through a glaze layer like looking through a piece of tinted stained glass at the layers below. It doesn't entirely mask the layers below necessarily, but you look through the glaze at them, and it gives you enormous power to orchestrate paintings. It's wonderful. So it can be done with oil and acrylic paint, and possibly others. We'll look at that. Given the translucent nature of glazes, the uses are in fact infinite in terms of what you're trying to accomplish with a painting. Literally, there's no end to them. Here are some examples. Tinting individual colors. You don't need to necessarily completely overpaint them. You can tint them with a glaze to correct the color. Secondly, unifying. Very often, the colors in a painting will look unrelated to each other. A glaze can pull them together by giving all the colors a little of one ingredient, causing what you might say is a type of family resemblance between the colors. The third method is creating air. Quite simply, we live on a planet with air, with vapor and haze in the air, but in a lot of paintings you notice they seem airless. They seem vacuous. There's no sense of space, distance, and a great body of air in the painting. Glazes are the easiest way to produce a sense of air and distance. Fourth is the production of architecture or three-dimensionality in a painting. Now, the way we understand three-dimensional objects in our world is this. We live on a planet in which the sun appears to be orange because the blue rays have been taken out of what is in fact a white sun and have been dispersed into the sky, giving us a blue sky. So the sun is mainly bereft of blue, making it tinted orange. Well, the way things look then out in the sunshine is that the lit side tends to be slightly orange, and the unlit side, or the shadowed side, tends to be slightly blue from the ambient blue light. Giving them what we have learned is a three-dimensionality. Now, if a painting lacks that, by using two glazes, one of the blue ambient light, one of the orange direct light, you can endow all the objects in the painting with a distinct three-dimensionality, because everything in our world is unified by that. Of course, in some situations where there's a cold electric light, it's the other way around. Cold direct light, warm ambient light, and you would follow suit in paintings of those situations. The fifth aspect is orchestration, and that really covers everything that remains, because quite simply, you orchestrate paintings, lightening here, darkening there, cooling this, warming that, and that is what brings a painting through from when it's covered to when it's basically acceptable and finished. And glazes are indispensable in that task, in my opinion. So, given this translucent nature of glazes, they can be applied to any style, obviously, from abstract, which at its best is just as sophisticated, requires just as much precision and tuning of color as realism. From abstract through minimalism, the same law applies, through hyperrealism that I would suggest to you is completely dependent upon the use of glazes, to traditional painting and basically anything else, anything you can imagine, any style. They can also be used on any material and in any medium, as follows. Paintings, of course, collages. I had a friend once in the south of England who made these wonderful collages, and he put acrylic glazes on them, and they were absolutely beautiful. It turned them into paintings of a sort. It was really magical. Mixed media, more or less any material has some kind of paint that can be used as a glaze. Sculptures, particularly plaster sculptures, can easily be glazed. As you know, regular bronze sculptures are already glazed, all of them, because they're all given a metallurgic or mineral patina to color the surface. And also, around us every day, furniture and objets d'art, they are almost all glazed with something, or you certainly can glaze them and adjust their colors with translucent glazes. I've done a lot of that myself and enjoyed doing it. So anyone that has been introduced to glazing, I've really never met anyone that I've taught that hasn't concluded, well, how did I get by without glazes before? I've never had that happen. It's like a pianist discovering the black keys on the keyboard. Oh, these are here too. That's what it's like. They also have another effect, and that is layering. Because in the traditional process of making a painting, layering is absolutely the cornerstone of the principle. And glazes can be used alternating with thick impasto paint in any way that you can imagine. So in other words, impasto paint, you have to let it dry first, and then a glaze, maybe 3 glazes, and then more impasto paint and maybe 10 glazes on top of that. You simply allow all those coats to dry before putting on the next one, unless, of course, you want to produce an interesting effect, in which case you can. So the result of that, though, the look of paintings that have so many layers, alternating impasto and glaze, is just exquisite. And I love the whole feel and look of art like that. And in fact, I'm sure you've seen it in museums. You've probably, for those of you that are unfamiliar with glazes, you've probably looked at glazes on countless occasions in museums, but just not known that they were glazes. Let's talk about the materials that you need in order to use or make or buy glaze medium. First of all, when you're painting in oil, you must use oil glazes. And when you're painting in acrylic, you must use acrylic glazes. They're different materials, they have different properties, they don't like mixing, and generally they will become enemies, and whichever was the last to go on will peel off. They're disastrous put together. Oil glaze medium, at its very best, has certain very specific ingredients. And this is what they are. Stand oil, possibly sun-refined oil, although it does tend to yellow a little. It's not quite as good as stand oil. Damar varnish, pure gum spirits of turpentine, and cobalt dryers. Now this is according to Ralph Meyer. Ralph Meyer was a real specialist in artist techniques and materials. He wrote book after book in which he analyzed and showed illustrations of his experiments and gave all his results. And he studied the masters and the techniques they used. Now, to an extent, Ralph Meyer has been superseded by other researchers. But personally, I'm a little cautious about following the recent ones, because if they suggest materials that have been developed in the last 100 years, well, in my opinion, even if research suggests that those materials will last, I don't think you can entirely depend upon that, because the masters and the materials they used, which can be used to make paintings as modern and as contemporary as you like, those materials did actually last for 500 or 600 years, which I think is probably the best kind of research, personally. Oils and various materials all have their own properties. You just have to know that copal varnish and oil yellow quite badly, so they're not a good idea to use in glazes. Too much regular linseed oil tends to wrinkle if you use it in any form. For example, if you use it as a straight medium, if it's overused, it tends to wrinkle. Mineral spirits fail to mix with dammer varnish, and so forth. So all the oils, mediums, and thinners, they all have their own properties. Now later what we will do is we will make a video on exactly how to make really excellent dammer glaze medium. But in the meantime, you can buy ready-made glaze mediums. And when you do so, I would suggest watch out for what they contain, buy them in small quantities, and my view, this is yet to be tested, but is to intentionally leave them in the daylight, leave them in the sun. You may even photograph them when you first buy them and re-photograph them every month or two to see which of them yellow. If over time they yellow badly, it's a bad sign, because if you mix a color and put it on, you really don't want that color getting messed with over time by having yellowing materials in it. For acrylic glaze medium, I have tended to like using golden acrylic glazing liquid. I've bought satin and gloss. You can intermix them and get them until they're the level of shine that you like, and they seem to have worked. But there are problems with glazing in acrylic. Problems as far as I'm concerned anyway, and that is that acrylics dry fast. And the difficulty is you will see in the demonstrations that you need time to work glazes, to flatten them out and pull them off from certain areas. Now, it's harder with acrylic because of the speed of drying. So you certainly have to use retarders and also keep them sprayed down. But that too can have its problems. If a glaze medium begins to dry in the process of being worked, and then you spray it down, you can get little filaments of already hardened medium floating around. Now, having said all of that, there are some contemporary artists that might really like what acrylic glazes do. In other words, what I regard as problems, they may regard as great advantages. So in one sense, hear me when I tell you what acrylic does, but also take it with a pinch of salt, because it entirely depends on what effect you want to create. I'm only telling you what it does. You may also find ways around it doing what it did in my experience. Then we come to brushes. And there are several stages of working with glazes, so you need several kinds of brushes. And you'll see this again in the demonstrations. First of all, you want to get the glaze mediums on fast so that you've got as much working time as possible. And I tend to like using house painting brushes. They're inexpensive, and I prefer bristle rather than nylon, because bristle tends to soak up the glaze medium. It clings to it. The brush carries more medium, and it seems to lay the medium out better onto the painting. I like it, because you're wanting to carry it from wherever it's mixed onto the painting. So these are absolutely perfect for that. Secondly, these brushes you need to use to flatten the glaze medium out. Now, not everyone will want it perfectly smooth and very subtle. Some actually want it to look more rugged so that it's very visible that there is in fact a glaze on there. But if you want it flat, I like these brushes. They're made of a finer, dark hair for the most part, although this in fact is made of nylon. I think this is too. And nylon in this case actually does work for smoothing it out and making the glaze very flat. I like them. With a lot of these brushes, nowadays I find it is not written on the side of the brush as to what kind of hair it is. I don't know what it is, but nonetheless, they work just fine. They're cheap. You can buy them in regular art stores, in the chain stores, very inexpensively. But watch out for hairs coming out. You may need to pick them out of the painting with the edge of the brush. The third kind of brush is the fan. And once you've pulled off areas of the glaze medium from where you don't want it on the painting, you may need to soften the edges. Now, if there's a large area in which you don't want the glaze, you'll use fans like this to soften those edges so that you don't have a hard line. These are absolutely perfect, and if you're dealing with small areas, fiddly areas in paintings, these cheap craft brushes are just ideal. You can really work with them and stipple them, so you can really give them punishment and they stand up to it. And again, these are inexpensive. I like to lavish my money on the Impasto solid painting brushes and put a lot of money into them to get good quality ones, but not on these, because glaze medium requires just this. As for the demonstrations, no demonstration really shows everything that glaze medium can do. Because, as I said, there are so many functions for glazes that every demonstration will basically demonstrate one function. So understand that. Understand that in this it's doing one thing, in the next demonstration it will do another, and we'll try to provide as many demo videos as possible in glazing, using paintings that are very different from each other so that you can see a range of all the things that you can get out of glazes.